This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bluebird for Children. Written by Georgette Leblanc. Edited by Frederick Orville Perkins. Translated by Alexander Tirexier de Matos. And read by Ian King. Chapter 4. The Palace of Night. Some time after, the children and their friends met at the first dawn to go to the Palace of Night, where they hoped to find the Bluebird. Several of the party failed to answer to their names when the roll was called. Milk, for whom any sort of excitement was bad, was keeping her room. Water sent an excuse. She was accustomed always to travel in a bed of moss, was already half dead with fatigue and was afraid of falling ill. As for Light, she had been on bad terms with Night since the world began, and Fire, as a relation, shared her dislike. Light kissed the children and told Tyltyl the way, for it was his business to lead the expedition, and the little band set out upon its road. You can imagine dear Tyltyl trotting ahead on his hind legs like a little man, with his nose in the air, his tongue dangling down his chin, his front paws folded across his chest. He fidgets, sniffs about, runs up and down, covering twice the ground without minding how tired it makes him. He is so full of his own importance that he disdains the temptations on his path. He neglects the rubbish heaps, pays no attention to anything he sees, and cuts all his old friends. Poor Tyltyl, he was so delighted to become a man, and yet he was no happier than before. Of course, life was the same to him, because his nature had remained unchanged. What was the use of his being a man if he continued to feel and think like a dog? In fact, his troubles were increased 100-fold by the sense of responsibility that now weighed upon him. "Oh!" he said with a sigh, for he was joining blindly in his little god's search, without for a moment reflecting that the end of the journey would mean the end of his life. "Oh!" he said. "If I got hold of that rascal of a Bluebird, trust me, I wouldn't touch him even with the tip of my tongue, not if he were as plump and as sweet as a quail." Bread followed solemnly, carrying the cage. The two children came next, and Sugar brought up the rear. But where was the Cat? To discover the reason of her absence, we must go a little way back and read her thoughts. At the time when Tylette called a meeting of the animals and things in the Fairies' Hall, she was contemplating a great plot which would aim at prolonging the journey. But she had reckoned without the stupidity of her hearers.
"The idiots!"
she thought.
"Have very nearly spoiled the whole thing by foolishly throwing themselves at the Fairies' feet, as though they were guilty of a crime. It is better to rely on oneself alone. In my cat life, all our training is founded on suspicion. I can see that it is just the same in the life of men. Those who confide in others are only betrayed. It is better to keep silent and to be treacherous one's self."
As you see, my dear little readers, the Cat was in the same position as the dog. She had not changed her soul and was simply continuing her former existence. But, of course, she was very wicked. Whereas our dear Tyltyl was, if anything, too good. Tylette therefore resolved to act on her own account and went, before daybreak, to call on Night, who was an old friend of hers. The road to the Palace of Night was rather long and rather dangerous. It had precipices on either side of it. You had to climb up and climb down and then climb up again among high rocks that always seemed waiting to crush the passers-by. At last you came to the edge of a dark circle, and there you had to go down thousands of steps to reach the black marble underground palace in which Night lived. The Cat, who had often been there before, raced along the road, light as a feather. Her cloak, borne on the wind, streamed like a banner behind her. The plume in her hat fluttered gracefully, and her little grey kid boots hardly touched the ground. She soon reached her destination and, in a few bounds, came to the great hall where Night was. It was really a wonderful sight. Night, stately and grand as a queen, reclined upon her throne. She slept, and not a glimmer, not a star twinkled around her. But we know that the Night had no secrets for cats, and that their eyes have the power of piercing the darkness. So Tylette saw Night as though it were broad daylight. Before waking her, she cast a loving glance at that motherly and familiar face. It was white and silvery as the moon, and its unbending features inspired both fear and admiration. Night's figure, which was half visible through her long black veils, was as beautiful as that of a Greek statue. She had long arms, and a pair of enormous wings, now furled in sleep, came from her shoulders to her feet and gave her a look of majesty beyond compare. Still, in spite of her affection for her best of friends, Tylette did not waste too much time in gazing at her. It was a critical moment, and time was short. Tired and jaded and overcome with anguish, she sank upon the steps of the throne and meowed plaintively.
"It is I, Mother of Night. I am worn out."
Night is of an anxious nature and easily alarmed. Her beauty, built up of peace and response, possesses the secret of silence, which life is constantly disturbing. A star shooting through the sky, a leaf falling to the ground, the hoot of an owl, a mere nothing, is enough to tear the black velvet pall which she spreads over the earth each evening. The cat, therefore, had not finished speaking when Night sat up, all quivering. Her immense wings beat around her and she questioned Tylette in a trembling voice. As soon as she had learned the danger that threatened her, she began to lament her fate. What? A man's son coming to her palace? And perhaps with the help of the magic diamond, discovering her secrets? What should she do? What would become of her? How could she defend herself? And, forgetting that she was sinning against the silence, her own particular god, Night began to utter piercing screams. It was true that falling into such a commotion was hardly likely to help her find a cure for her troubles. Likely for her, Tylette, who was accustomed to the annoyance and worries of human life, was better armed. She had worked out her plan when going ahead of the children, and she was hoping to persuade Night to adopt it. She explained this plan to her in a few words.
"I see only one thing for it, Mother Night. As they are children, we must give them such a fright that they will not dare to insist on opening the great door at the back of the hall, behind which the birds of the moon live, and generally the bluebird too. The secrets of the other caverns will be sure to scare them. The hope of our safety lies in the terror which you will make them feel."
There was clearly no other course to take. But Night had not time to reply, for she heard a sound. Then her beautiful features contracted, her wings spread out angrily, and everything in her attitude told Tylette that Night approved of her plan.
"Here they are!"
cried the cat. The little band came marching down the steps of Night's gloomy staircase. Tylô pranced bravely in front, whereas Tyltyl looked around him with an anxious glance. He certainly found nothing to comfort him. It was all very magnificent, but very terrifying. Picture a huge, wonderful black marble hall of a stern and tomb-like splendour. There is no ceiling visible, and the ebony pillars that surround the amphitheatre shoot up to the sky. It is only when you lift your eyes up there that you catch the faint light falling from the stars. Everywhere the thickest darkness reigns. Two restless flames, no more, flicker on either side of Night's throne. Before a monumental door of brass, bronze doors show through the pillars to the right and left. The cat rushed up to the children.
"This way, little master, this way. I have told Night, and she is delighted to see you."
Tylette's soft voice and smile made Tyltyl feel himself again, and he walked up to the throne with a bold and confident step, saying,
"Good day, Mrs. Night."
Night was offended by the word "good day," which reminded her of her eternal enemy, Light, and answered dryly,
"Good day? I'm not used to that. You might say good night, or at least good evening."
Our hero was not prepared to quarrel. He felt very small in the presence of that stately lady. He quickly begged her pardon as nicely as he could, and very gently asked her leave to look for the bluebird in her palace.
"I have never seen him. He is not out here!"
exclaimed Night, flapping her great wings to frighten the boy. But when he insisted and gave no sign of fear, she herself began to dread the diamond, which, by lighting up her darkness, would completely destroy her power, and she thought it better to pretend to yield to an impulse of generosity and at once to point to the big key that lay on the steps of the throne. Without a moment's hesitation, Tyltyl seized hold of it and ran to the first door of the hall. Everybody shook with fright. Bread's teeth chattered in his head. Sugar, who was standing some way off, moaned with mortal anguish. Mytyl howled.
"Where is Sugar? I want to go home."
Meanwhile, Tyltyl, pale and resolute, was trying to open the door, while Night's grave voice, rising above the din, proclaimed the first danger.
"It's the ghosts!"
"Oh dear," thought Tyltyl.
"I have never seen a ghost. It must be awful."
The faithful Tylô by his side was panting with all his might, for dogs hate anything uncanny. At last the key grated in the lock. Silence reigned as dense and heavy as the darkness. No one dared draw a breath. Then the door opened, and in a moment the gloom was filled with white figures running in every direction. Some lengthened out right up to the sky. Others twined themselves round the pillars. Others wriggled ever so fast along the ground. They were something like men, but it was impossible to distinguish their features. The eye could not catch them. The moment you looked at them, they turned into a white mist. Tyltyl did his best to chase them, for Mrs. Night kept to the plan contrived by the cat and pretended to be frightened. She had been the ghost's friend for hundreds and hundreds of years and had only to say a word to drive them in again. But she was careful to do nothing of the sort, and, flapping her wings like mad, she called upon all her gods and screamed,
"Drive them away! Drive them away! Help! Help!"
But the poor ghosts, who hardly ever came out now that man no longer believed in them, were much too happy at taking a breath of air. And had it not been that they were afraid of Tylô, who tried to bite their legs, they would never have been put back indoors.
"Oof!"
gasped the dog when the door was shut at last.
"I have strong teeth, goodness knows, but chaps like those I never saw before. When you bite them, you'd think their legs were made of cotton."
By this time, Tyltyl was making for the second door and asking,
"What's behind this one?"
Night made a gesture as though to put him off. Did the obstinate little fellow really want to see everything?
"Must I be careful when I open it?"
asked Tyltyl.
"No!"
said Night.
"It is not worthwhile. It's the sicknesses. They are very quiet, the poor little things. Man, for some time, has been waging such war upon them. Open and see for yourself."
Tyltyl threw the door wide open and stood speechless with astonishment. There was nothing to be seen. He was just about to close the door again when he was hustled aside by a little body in a dressing gown and a cotton nightcap who began to frisk about the hall, wagging her head and stopping every minute to cough, sneeze and blow her nose, and to pull on her slippers, which were too big for her and kept dropping off her feet. Sugar, Bread and Tyltyl were no longer frightened and began to laugh like anything. But they had no sooner come near the little person in the cotton nightcap than they themselves began to cough and sneeze.
"It's the least important of the sicknesses,"
said Night.
"It's cold in the head. Oh dear! Oh dear!"
thought Sugar.
"If my nose keeps on running like this, I'm done for. I shall melt."
Poor Sugar! He did not know where to hide himself. He had become very much attached to life since the journey began, for he had fallen over head and ears in love with water, and yet this love caused him the greatest worry. Miss Water was a tremendous flirt, expected a lot of attention and was not particular with whom she mixed. But mixing too much with Water was an expensive luxury, as poor Sugar found to his cost, for at every kiss he gave her, he left a bit of himself behind until he began to tremble for his life. When he suddenly found himself attacked by cold in the head, he would have had to fly from the palace, but for the timely aid of our dear Tylô, who ran after the little minx and drove her back into her cabin, amidst the laughter of Tyltyl and Mytil, who thought gleefully that, so far, the trial had not been very terrible. The boy therefore ran to the next door with still greater courage.
"Take care!"
cried Night in a dreadful voice.
"It's the wars!
They are more powerful than ever. I daren't think what would happen if one of them broke loose. Stand ready, all of you, to push back the door."
Night had not finished uttering her warnings when the plucky little fellow repented his rashness. He tried in vain to shut the door which he had opened. An invincible force was pushing it from the other side. Streams of blood flowed through the cracks. Flames shot forth. Shouts, oaths and groans mingled with the roar of cannon and the rattle of musketry. Everything in the Palace of Night was running about in wild confusion. Bread and Sugar tried to take to flight, but could not find the way out, and they now came back to Tyltyl and put their shoulders to the door with despairing force. The cat pretended to be anxious while secretly rejoicing.
"This may be the end of it,"
she said, curling her whiskers.
"They won't dare go on after this."
Dear Tylo made superhuman efforts to help his little master, while Mytyl stood crying in a corner. At last our hero gave a shout of triumph.
"Hooray! They're giving way! Victory! Victory! The door is shut!"
At the same time, he dropped on the steps, utterly exhausted, dabbing his forehead with his poor little hands, which shook with terror.
"Well?"
asked Night harshly.
"Have you had enough? Did you see them?"
Yes,
replied the little fellow, sobbing.
"They are hideous and awful. I don't think they have the bluebird." "You may be sure they haven't,"
answered Night angrily.
"If they had, they would eat him at once. You see, there is nothing to be done."
Tyltyl drew himself up proudly.
"I must see everything,"
he declared.
"Light said so." "It's an easy thing to say,"
retorted Night.
"when one's afraid and stays at home." "Let us go to the next door,"
said Tyltyl resolutely.
"What's in here?" "This is where I keep the shades and the terrors."
Tyltyl reflected for a minute.
"As far as shades go,"
he thought,
"Mrs. Night is poking fun at me. It's more than an hour since I've seen anything but shade in this house of hers, and I shall be very glad to see daylight again. As for the terrors, if they are anything like the ghosts, we shall have another good joke."
Our friend went to the door and opened it before his companions had time to protest. For that matter, they were all sitting on the floor, exhausted with the last fright, and they looked at one another in astonishment, glad to find themselves alive after such a scare. Meanwhile, Tyltyl threw back the door and nothing came out.
"There's no one there,"
he said.
"Yes, there it is! Yes, there is! Look out!"
said Night, who was still shamming fright. She was simply furious. She had hoped to make a great impression with her terrors, and lo and behold, the wretches who had so long been snubbed by man were afraid of him. She encouraged them with kind words and succeeded in coaxing out a few tall figures covered in grey veils. They began to run all around the hall until, hearing the children laugh, they were seized with fear and rushed indoors again. The attempt had failed as far as Night was concerned, and the dread hour was about to strike. Already Tyltyl was moving towards the big door at the end of the hall. A few last words took place between them.
"Do not open that one,"
said Night in awe-struck tones.
"Why not?" "Because it's not allowed." "Then it's here that the bluebird is hidden. Go no further. Do not tempt fate. Do not open that door." "But why?"
again asked Tyltyl obstinately. Thereupon, Night, irritated by his persistence, flew into a rage, hurled the most terrible threats at him, and ended by saying,
"No one of those who have opened it, were it by a hair's breadth, but have ever returned alive to the light of day. It means certain death, and all the horrors, all the terrors, all the fears of which men speak on earth are as nothing compared with those which await if you insist on touching that door." "Don't do it, master dear,"
said Bread with chattering teeth.
"Don't do it. Take pity on us. I implore you, on my knees."
"You are sacrificing the lives of all of us?"
meowed the cat.
"I won't. I shan't,"
sobbed Mytyl.
"Pity, pity!"
whined Sugar, wringing her fingers. All of them were weeping and crying. All of them crowded around Tyltyl. Dear Tylo alone, who respected his little master's wishes, dared not speak a word, though he fully believed that his last hour had come. 2 big tears rolled down his cheeks, and he licked Tyltyl's hands in despair. It was really a most touching scene, and for a moment our hero hesitated. His heart beat wildly, his throat was parched with anguish. He tried to speak and could not get out a sound. Besides, he did not wish to show weakness in the presence of his hapless companions.
"If I have not the strength to fulfill my task,"
he said to himself,
"who will fulfill it? If my friends behold my distress, it's all up to me. They will not let me go through with my mission, and I shall never find the bluebird."
At this thought, the boy's heart leaped within his breast, and all his generous nature rose in rebellion. It would never do to be, perhaps, within arm's reach of happiness, and not to try for it, at the risk of dying in the attempt, to try for it and hand it over at last to all mankind. That settled it. Tyltyl resolved to sacrifice himself like a true hero. He brandished the heavy golden key and cried,
"I must open the door."
He ran up to the great door with Tylo panting by his side. The poor dog was half dead with fright, but his pride and his devotion to Tyltyl obliged him to smother his fears.
"I shall stay,"
he said to his master.
"I'm not afraid. I shall stay with my little god."
In the meantime, all the others had fled. Bread was crumbling to bits behind a pillar. Sugar was melting in a corner with Mytyl in his arms. Night and the cat, both shaking with fury, kept to the far end of the hall. Then Tyltyl gave Tylo a last kiss, pressed him to his heart, and with never a tremble put the key in the lock. Yells of terror came from all of the corners of the hall where the runaways had taken shelter, while the 2 leaves of the great door opened by magic in front of our little friend, who was struck dumb with admiration and delight. What an exquisite surprise! A wonderful garden lay before him, a dream garden filled with flowers that shone like stars, waterfalls that came rushing from the sky, and trees which the moon had clothed in silver. And then there was something whirling like a blue cloud among the clusters of roses. Tyltyl rubbed his eyes. He could not believe his senses. He waited, looked again, and then dashed into the garden, shouting like mad.
Come quickly! They are here! We have them at last! Millions of bluebirds! Thousands of millions! Come, Mytyl! Come, Tylo! Come all! Help me! You can catch them by the handfuls."
Reassured at last, his friends came running up and all darted in among the birds, seeing who could catch the most.
"I've caught 7 already!"
cried Mytyl.
"I can't hold them!" "Nor can I,"
said Tyltyl.
"I have too many of them. They're escaping from my arms. Tylo has some too. Let us go out. Let us go. Light is waiting for us. How pleased she will be. This way, this way!"
And they all danced and scampered away in their glee, singing songs of triumph as they went. Night and the cat, who had not shared in the general rejoicing, crept back anxiously to the great door, and Night whimpered.
"Haven't they got him?" "No,"
said the cat, who saw the real bluebird perched high on a moonbeam.
"They could not reach him. He kept too high."
Our friends, all in a haste, ran up the numberless stairs between them and the daylight. Each of them hugged the birds which he had captured, never dreaming that every step which brought them nearer to the light was fatal to the poor things, so that by the time they came to the top of the staircase, they were carrying nothing but dead birds. Light was waiting for them anxiously.
"Well, have you caught him?"
she asked.
Yes,
said Tyltyl.
"Lots of them. There are thousands. Look!"
As he spoke, he held out the dear birds to her and saw, to his dismay, that they were nothing more than lifeless corpses. Their poor little wings were broken and their heads drooped sadly from their necks. The boy, in his despair, turned to his companions. Alas, they too were hugging nothing but dead birds. Then Tyltyl threw himself sobbing into Light's arms. Once more, all his hopes were dashed to the ground.
"Do not cry, my child,"
said Light.
"You did not catch the one that is able to live in broad daylight. We shall find him yet."
Of course,
we shall find him,
said Bread and Sugar with one voice. They were great boobies, both of them, but they wanted to console the boy. As for friend Tylo, He was so much put out that he forgot his dignity for a moment and, looking at the dead birds, exclaimed,
"Are they good to eat, I wonder?"
The party set out to walk back and sleep in the Temple of Light. It was a melancholy journey. All regretted the peace of home and felt inclined to blame Tyltyl for his want of caution. Sugar edged up to Bread and whispered in his ear,
"Don't you think, Mr. Chairman, that all this excitement is very useless?"
And Bread, who felt flattered at receiving so much attention, answered pompously,
"Never you fear, my dear fellow. I shall put all this right. Life would be unbearable if we had to listen to all the whimsies of the little madcap. Tomorrow we shall stay in bed."
They forgot that, but for the boy at whom they were sneering, they would never have been alive at all, and that, if he had suddenly told Bread that he must go back to his pan to be eaten, and Sugar that he was to be cut into small lumps to sweeten Daddy Tyl's coffee and Mummy Tyl's syrups, they would have thrown themselves at their benefactor's feet and begged for mercy. In fact, they were incapable of appreciating their good luck until they were brought face to face with bad. Poor things! The Fairy Berilyuna, when making them a present of their human life, ought to have thrown in a little wisdom. They were not so much to blame, of course. They were only following man's example. Given the power of speaking, they jabbered. Knowing how to judge, they condemned. Able to feel, they complained. They had hearts which increased their sense of fear without adding to their happiness. As to their brains, which could easily have arranged all the rest, they made so little of them that they had already grown quite rusty. And if you could have opened their heads and looked at the works of their life inside, you would have seen the poor brains, which were their most precious possessions, jumping about at every movement they made and rattling in their empty skulls like dried peas in a pod. Fortunately, Light, thanks to her wonderful insight, knew all about their state of mind. She determined, therefore, to employ the elements in things no more than she was obliged to.
"They are useful," she thought, "to feed the children and amuse them on the way. But they must have no further share in the trials, because they have neither courage nor conviction."
Meanwhile, the party walked on. The road widened out and became resplendent. And at the end, the Temple of Light stood on a crystal height, shedding its beams around. The tired children made the dog carry them pick-a-back by turns, and they were almost asleep when they reached the shining steps. The end of Chapter 4, The Palace of Night, read by Ian King. Chapter 5 of The Bluebird for Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bluebird for Children by Georgette Leblanc, translated by Alexandra Teresa de Matos. Chapter 5 The Kingdom of the Future, read by Ian King. Tyltyl and Mytyl woke up next morning feeling very gay with childish carelessness. They had forgotten their disappointment. Tyltyl was very proud of the compliments which Light had paid him. She seemed as happy as though he had brought the Bluebird with him. She said with a smile as she stroked the lad's dark curls,
"I am quite satisfied. You are such a good, brave boy that you will soon find what you are looking for."
Tyltyl did not understand the deep meaning of her words, but for all that he was very glad to hear them. And besides, Light had promised him that today he would have nothing to fear in their new expedition. On the contrary, he would meet millions and millions of little children who would show him the most wonderful toys of which no one on earth had the least idea. She also told him that he and his little sister would travel alone with her this time, and that all the others would take a rest while they were gone. This is why, at the moment when our chapter opens, they all met in the underground vaults of the temple. Light thought it as well to lock up the elements and things. She knew that if they were left to do as they pleased, they might escape and get into mischief. It was not so very cruel of her, because the vaults of her temple are even lighter and lovelier than the upper floors of human houses. But you cannot get out without her leave. She alone has the power of widening, with a stroke of her wand, a little cleft in the emerald wall at the end of the passage, through which you go down a few crystal steps till you come to a sort of cave, all green and transparent, like a forest when the sunlight sweeps through its branches. Usually this great hall was quite empty, but now it had sofas in it and a gold table laid with fruits and cakes and creams and delicious wines, which Light's servants had just finished setting out. Light's servants were very odd. They always made the children laugh with their long white satin dresses and their little black caps with a flame at the top. They looked like lighted candles. Their mistress sent them away and then told the animals and things to be very good and asked if they would like some books and games to play with. They answered with a laugh that nothing amused them more than eating and sleeping, and that they were very glad to stay where they were. Tyltyl, of course, did not share this view. His heart spoke louder than his greed of his laziness, and his great dark eyes turned in entreaty on Tyltyl, who would have been only too pleased to take his faithful companion with him, if Light had not absolutely forbidden it.
"I can't help it,"
said the boy, giving him a kiss.
"It seems that dogs are not admitted where we are going."
Suddenly Tyltyl sprang up with delight. A great idea had struck him. He had not left his real doggy life long enough to forget any part of it, especially his troubles. Which was the greatest of these? Was it not the chain? What melancholy hours Tyltyl had spent fastened to an iron ring! And what humiliation he had endured when the woodcutter used to take him to the village and, with unspeakable silliness, keep him on the lead in front of everybody, thus depriving him of the pleasure of greeting his friends and sniffing the smells provided for his benefit at every street corner and in every gutter.
"Well,"
he said to himself,
"I shall have to submit to that humiliating torture once again to go with my little god."
Faithful to his traditions, he had, in spite of his fine clothes, kept his doggy collar, but not his lead. What was to be done? He was once more in despair when he saw Water lying on a sofa and playing, in an absent-minded sort of way, with her long strings and coral. He ran up to her as prettily as he could and, after paying her a heap of compliments, begged her to lend him her biggest necklace. She was in a good temper and not only did what he asked, but was kind enough to fasten the end of the coral string to his collar. Tyltyl gaily went up to his master, handing him this necklace Chang, and kneeling at his feet, said,
"Take me with you like this, my little god. Men never say a word to a poor dog when he is on his chain."
"Alas, even like this, you cannot come,"
said Light, who was much touched by this act of self-sacrifice, and, to cheer him up, she told him that fate would soon provide a trial for the children in which his assistance would be of great use. As she spoke these words, she touched the emerald wall, which opened to let her pass through with the children. Her chariot was waiting outside the entrance to the temple. It was a lovely shell of jade, inlaid with gold. They all three took their seats, and the two great white birds harnessed to it at once flew off through the clouds. The chariot travelled very fast, and they were not long on the road, much to the regret of the children, who were enjoying themselves and laughing like anything. But other and even more beautiful surprises awaited them. The clouds vanished around them, and suddenly they found themselves in a dazzling azure palace. Here all was blue. The light, the flagstones, the columns, the vaults, everything, down to the smallest objects, was of an intense and fairy-like blue. There was no seeing the end of the palace. The eyes were lost in the infinite sapphire vistas.
"How lovely it all is!"
said Tyltyl, who could not get over his astonishment.
"Goodness me, how lovely! Where are we?"
"We are in the kingdom of the future,"
said Light,
"in the midst of the children who are not yet born. As the diamond allows us to see clearly in this region which is hidden from men, we shall perhaps find the bluebird here. Look at the children running up."
From every side came bands of little children dressed from head to foot in blue. They had beautiful dark or golden hair, and they were all exquisitely pretty. They shouted gleefully,
"Live children! Come and look at the little live children!
Come
and look at the little live children!"
"Why do they call us the little live children?" asked Tyltyl of Light.
"It is because they themselves are not alive yet. They are awaiting the hour of their birth. For it is from here that all the children come who were born upon our earth. When the fathers and mothers want children, the great doors which you see over there at the back are opened, and the little ones go down."
"What a lot there are! What a lot there are!" cried Tyltyl.
"There are many more,"
said Light.
"No one could count them, but a little further you will see other things
things. Tyltyl did as he was told and elbowed his way through. But it was difficult for him to move because a crowd of blue children pressed all around them. At last, by mounting on a step, our little friend was able to look over the throng of inquisitive heads and see what was happening in every part of the hall. It was most extraordinary. Tyltyl had never dreamed of anything like it. He danced with joy, and Mytyl, who was hanging on to him and standing on tiptoe so that she might see too, clapped her little hands and gave loud cries of wonder. All around were millions of children in blue, some playing, others walking about, others talking or thinking. Many were asleep. Many also were at work, and their instruments, their tools, the machines which they were building, the plants, the flowers and the fruits which they were growing or gathering were of the same bright and heavenly blue as the general appearance of the palace. Among the children moved tall persons also dressed in blue. They were very beautiful and looked like angels. They came up to Light and smiled and gently pushed aside the blue children, who went back quietly to what they were doing, though still watching our friends with astonished eyes. One of them, however, remained standing close to Tyltyl. He was quite small. From under his long sky-blue silk dress peeped two little pink and dimpled bare feet. His eyes stared in curiosity at the little live boy, and he went up to him as though in spite of himself. "May I talk to him?" asked Tyltyl, who felt half glad and half frightened. "Certainly," said Light. "You must make friends. I will leave you alone. You will be more at ease by yourselves." So saying, she went away and left the two children face to face, shyly smiling. Suddenly they began to talk. "How do you do?" said Tyltyl, putting out his hand to the child. But the child did not understand what that meant and stood without moving. "What's that?" continued Tyltyl, touching the child's blue dress. The child, who was absorbed in what he was looking at, did not answer, but gravely touched Tyltyl's hat with his finger. "And that?" he lisped. That's my hat," said Tyltyl. "Have you no hat?" "No, what is it for?" asked the child. "It's to say, 'How do you do?' with," Tyltyl answered. "And then for when it's cold." "What does that mean, when it's cold?" asked the child. "When you shiver like this," brrr, brrr, said Tyltyl. "And when you go like this with your arms," vigorously beating his arms across his chest. "Is it cold on earth?" asked the child. "Yes, sometimes in winter, where there is no fire." "Why is there no fire?" "Because it's expensive and it costs money to buy wood." The child looked at Tyltyl again as though he did not understand a word that Tyltyl was saying, and Tyltyl in his turn looked amazed. "It's quite clear that he knows nothing of the most everyday things," thought our hero, while the child stared with no small respect at the little live boy who knew everything. Then he asked Tyltyl what money was. "Why, it's what you pay with," said Tyltyl, scorning to give any further explanation. "Oh," said the child seriously. Of course he did not understand. How could he know? A little boy like that, who lived in a paradise where his least wishes were granted before he had learned to put them into words. "How old are you?" asked Tyltyl, continuing the conversation. "I am going to be born soon," said the child. "I shall be born in 12 years. Is it nice to be born?" "Oh, yes," cried Tyltyl without thinking. "It's great fun." But he was very much at a loss when the little boy asked him how he managed. His pride did not allow him to be ignorant of anything in another child's presence, and it was quite droll to see him with his hands in his breeches pockets, his legs wide apart, his face upturned and his whole attitude that of a man who is in no hurry to reply. At last he answered with a shrug of the shoulders. "Upon my word, I can't remember. It's so long ago." "They say it's lovely, the earth and the live people," remarked the child. "Yes, it's not bad," said Tyltyl. "There are birds and cakes and toys. Some have them all, but those who have none can look at the others." This reflection shows us the whole character of our little friend. He was proud and inclined to be rather high and mighty, but he was never envious, and his generous nature made up to him for his poverty by allowing him to allow the good fortune of others. The two children talked a good deal more, but it would take too long to tell you all they said, because what they said was sometimes only interesting to themselves. After a while, Light, who was watching them from a distance, hurried up to them, a little anxious. Tyltyl was crying, Big tears came rolling down his cheeks and falling on his smart coat. She understood that he was talking of his grandmother and that he could not keep back his tears at the thought of the love which he had lost. He was turning away his head to hide his feelings, but the inquisitive child kept asking him questions.
Do the grannies die? What does that mean, dying? They go away one evening and do not come back. Has yours gone?
Yes, said Tyltyl.
Yes, she was very kind to me.
And at these words, the poor little fellow began to cry again. The Blue Child had never seen anyone cry. He lived in a world where grief did not exist. His surprise was great, and he exclaimed,
What's the matter with your eyes? Are they making pearls?
To him, those tears were wonderful things.
No, it's not pearls,
said Tyltyl sheepishly.
What is it then?
But our poor friend would not admit what he looked upon as a weakness. He rubbed his eyes awkwardly and put everything down to the dazzling blue of the palace. The puzzled child insisted.
What's that falling down? Nothing. It's a little water,
said Tyltyl impatiently, hoping to cut short the explanation. But that was out of the question. The child was very obstinate, touched Tyltyl's cheeks with his fingers and asked in a tone of curiosity.
Does it come from the eyes?
Yes.
Sometimes when one cries. What does that mean, crying?
Asked the child.
I have not been crying,
said Tyltyl proudly.
It's the fault of that blue. But if I had cried, it would be the same thing. Do you often cry on earth? Not little boys, but little girls do. Don't you cry here? No, I don't know how. Well, you will learn.
At that moment, a great breath of wind made him turn his head, and he saw, at a few steps away from him, a large piece of machinery which he had not noticed at first, as he was taken up with his interest in the little child. It was a grand and magnificent thing, but I cannot tell you its name, because the inventions of the kingdoms of the future will not be christened by man until they reach the earth. I can only say that Tyltyl, when he looked at it, thought that the enormous azure wings that whizzed so swiftly before his eyes were like the windmills in his part of the world, and that if he ever found the blue bird, its wings would certainly be no more delicate, dainty or dazzling. Full of admiration, he asked his new acquaintance what they were.
Those?
Said the child.
That's for the invention which I shall make on earth.
And seeing Tyltyl stare with wide open eyes, he added,
When I am on earth, I shall have to invent the things that gives happiness. Would you like to see it? It is over there, between those two columns.
Tyltyl turned around to look, but all the children at once rushed at him, shouting,
No, come and see mine. No, mine is much finer. No, come and see mine.
Mine is wonderful invention.
No,
mine is made of sugar.
His is no good. I'm bringing a light which nobody knows of.
And so saying, the last child lit himself up entirely with a most extraordinary flame. Amid these joyous exclamations, the live children were dragged towards the blue workshops, where each of the little inventors set his machine going. It was a great blue whirl of discs and pulleys and straps and fly-wheels and driving wheels and cog-wheels and all kinds of wheels, which sent every sort of machine skimming over the ground or shooting up to the ceiling. Other blue children unfolded maps and plans, or opened great big books, or uncovered azure statues, or bought enormous flowers and gigantic fruits that seemed made of sapphire and turquoises. Our little friends stood with their mouths wide open and their hands clasped together. They thought themselves in paradise. Mytyl bent over to look at a huge flower and laughed into its cup, which covered up her head like a hood of blue silk. A pretty child with dark hair and thoughtful eyes held it by the stalk and said proudly,
The flowers will all grow like that when I am on the earth. When will that be?
Asked Tyltyl.
In 53 years, 4 months and 9 days.
Next came 2 blue children, bending under the weight of a pole from which there was slung a bunch of grapes, each larger than a pear.
A bunch of pears,
cried Tyltyl.
No, they are grapes,
said the child.
They will all be like that when I am 30. I have found the way.
Tyltyl would have loved to taste them, but another child came along, almost hidden under a basket, which one of the tall persons was helping him to carry. His fair-haired, rosy face smiled through the leaves that hung over the wicker work.
Look,
he said.
Look at my apples. But those are melons,
said Tyltyl.
No,
said the child.
They are my apples. They will all be alike when I am alive. I have discovered the process.
I should never finish if I were to try and describe to my little readers all the wonderful and incredible things that appeared before our hero's eyes. But suddenly a loud burst of laughter rang through the hall. A child had spoken of the king of the 9 planets, and Tyltyl, very much puzzled and perplexed, looked on every side. All the faces, bright with laughter, were turned to some spot which Tyltyl could not see. Every finger pointed in the same direction, but our friend looked in vain. They had spoken of a king. He was looking for a throne with a tall, dignified personage on it, wielding a golden sceptre. Over there, lower down, behind you, over there, behind you, said 1,000 little voices together.
But where is the king?
Where is the king? Tyltyl and Mytyl repeated, greatly interested. Then suddenly a loud and more serious voice sounded above the silvery murmur of the others.
Here I am,
it said proudly. And at the same time Tyltyl discovered a chubby baby which he had not yet remarked, for it was the smallest and had kept out of the way till then, sitting at the foot of a column in an attitude of indifference, seemingly wrapped in contemplation. The little king was the only one who had taken no notice of the live children. His beautiful liquid eyes as blue as the palace, were pursuing endless dreams. His right hand supported his head, which was already heavy with thought. His short tunic showed his dimpled knees, and a golden crown rested on his yellow locks. When he cried, "Here I am!" the baby rose from the step on which he was sitting and tried to climb onto it at one stride. But he was still so awkward that he lost his balance and he fell upon his nose. He at once picked himself up with so much dignity that nobody dared make fun of him. And this time he scrambled up on all fours and then, putting his legs wide apart, stood and eyed Tyltyl from top to toe. "You're not very big," said Tyltyl, doing his best to keep from laughing.
"I shall do great things when I am,"
retorted the king in a tone that admitted of no reply. "And what will you do?" asked Tyltyl.
"I shall found the General Confederation of the Solar Planets,"
said the king in a very pompous voice. Our friend was so much impressed that he could not find a word to say, and the king continued.
"All the planets will belong to it, except Uranus, Saturn and Neptune, which are so ridiculously far away."
Thereupon he toddled off the step again and resumed his first attitude, showing that he had said all that he meant to say. Tyltyl left him to his meditations. He was eager to know as many more of the children as he could. He was introduced to the discovery of a new sun, to the inventor of a new joy, to the hero who was to wipe out injustice from the earth, and to the wiseacre who was to conquer death. There were such lots and lots of them that it would take days and days to name them all. Our friend was rather tired and was beginning to feel bored when his attention was suddenly aroused by hearing a child's voice calling him. "Tyltyl, Tyltyl, how are you? Tyltyl, how are you?" A little blue child came running up from the back of the hall, pushing his way through the crowd. He was fair and slim and bright-eyed and had a great look of Mytyl. "How do you know my name?" asked Tyltyl. "It's not surprising," said the blue child, "considering that I shall be your brother." This time the live children were absolutely amazed. What an extraordinary meeting! They must certainly tell Mummy as soon as they got back. How astonished they would be at home! While they were making these reflections, the child went on to explain. "I am coming to you next year on Palm Sunday," he said. And he put 1,000 questions to his big brother. Was it comfortable at home? Was the food good? Was Daddy very severe? And Mummy?
"Oh, Mummy
is so kind," said the little ones. And they asked him questions in their turn. What was he going to do on earth? What was he bringing? "I am bringing 3 illnesses," said the little brother. "Scarlatini, whooping cough and measles." "Oh, that's all, is it?" cried Tyltyl. He shook his head with evident disappointment, while the other continued. "After that I shall leave you. It will hardly be worth while coming," said Tyltyl, feeling rather vexed. "We can't pick and choose," said the little brother pettishly. They would perhaps have quarrelled without waiting till they were on earth if they had not suddenly been parted by a swarm of blue children who were hurrying to meet somebody. At the same time there was a great noise as if thousands of invisible doors were being opened at the end of the galleries. "What's the matter?" asked Tyltyl. It's time, said one of the blue children. "He's going to open the doors." And the excitement increased on every side. The children left their machines and their labours. Those who were asleep woke up, and every eye was eager and anxiously turned to the great opal doors at the back. while every mouth repeated the same name. The word "time, time" was heard all around, and the great mysterious noise kept on. Tyltyl was dying to know what it meant. At last he caught a little child by the skirt of his dress and asked him.
"Let me be,"
said the child very uneasily.
"I'm in a hurry. It may be my turn today. It is the dawn rising. This is the hour when the children who are to be born today go to earth. You shall see. Time is drawing the bolts."
"Who is Time?" asked Tyltyl.
"An old man who comes to call those who are going,"
said another child.
"He is not so bad, but he won't listen or hear. Beg as they may, if it's not their turn, he pushes back all those who try to go. Let me be. It may be my turn now."
Light now hastened towards our little friends in a great state of alarm.
"I was looking for you,"
she said.
"Come, quick. It will never do for Time to discover you."
As she spoke these words, she threw her gold cloak around the children and dragged them to the corner of the hall where they could see everything without being seen. Tyltyl was very glad to be so well protected. He now knew that he who was about to appear possessed so great and tremendous a power that no human strength was capable of resisting him. He was at the same time a deity and an ogre. He bestowed life and he devoured it. He sped through the world so fast that you had no time to see him. He ate and ate without stopping. He took whatever he touched. In Tyltyl's family he had already taken Grandad and Granny, the little brothers, the little sisters and the old blackbird. He did not mind what he took, joys and sorrows, winters and summers. All was fish that came to his net. Knowing this, our friend was astonished to see everybody in the kingdom of the future running so fast to meet him.
"I suppose he doesn't eat anything here,"
he thought. There he was. The great doors turned slowly on their hinges. There was a distant music. It was the sounds of the earth. A red and green light penetrated into the hall, and Time appeared on the threshold. He was a tall and very thin old man, so old that his wrinkled face was all grey, like dust. His white beard came down to his knees. In one hand he carried an enormous scythe, in the other an hourglass. Behind him, some way out on a sea of the colours of the dawn, was a magnificent gold galley with white sails.
"Are they ready? Whose hour has struck?"
asked Time. At the sound of that voice, solemn and deep as a bronze gong, thousands of bright children's voices, like the little silver bells, answered,
"Here we are!
Here we are!
Here we are!
Here we are!
Here we are! Here we are!"
And in a moment, the blue children were crowding around the tall old man, who pushed them all back, and in a gruff voice said,
"One at a time. Once again, there are many more of you than are wanted. You can't deceive me."
Brandishing his scythe on one hand and holding out his cloak with the other, he barred the way to the rash children who tried to slip by him. Not one of them escaped the horrid old man's watchful eye.
"It's not your turn,"
he said to one.
"You're to be born tomorrow. Nor yours either. You've got 10 years to wait. A 13th shepherd? There are only 12 wanted. There is no need for more. More doctors? There are too many already. They are grumbling about it on the earth. And where are the engineers? They want an honest man. Only one, as a wonderful being."
Thereupon a poor child who was hung back until then came forward timidly, sucking his thumb. He looked pale and sad and walked with tottering footsteps. He was so wretched that even Time felt a moment's pity.
"It's you,"
he exclaimed.
"You seem to be a very poor specimen."
And in a moment the blue children were crowding around the tall old man, and lifting his eyes to the sky with a look of discouragement, he added,
"You won't live long."
And the moment went on. Each child, when denied, returned to his employment with a downcast air. When one of them was accepted, the others looked at him with envy. Now and then something happened, as when the hero who was to fight against the injustice refused to go, he clung to his playfellows, who called out to Time.
"He doesn't want to, sir. No, I don't want to go,"
cried the little fellow with all his might.
"I would rather not be born."
And quite right too, thought Tyltyl, who was full of common sense and knew what things are like on earth. For people always get beatings which they have not deserved, and when they have done wrong, you may be sure that the punishments will fall on one of their innocent friends.
"I wouldn't care to be in his place,"
said our friend to himself.
"I would rather hunt for the bluebird any day."
Meanwhile, the little seeker after justice went away, sobbing, frightened out of his life by Mr. Time. The excitement was now at its height. The children ran all over the hall. Those who were going packed up their inventions. Those who were staying behind had 1,000 requests to make.
Will you write to me?
Will you write to me?
They say one can't.
Oh, try, do try.
Do try.
And that's my idea.
Goodbye, Jing. Goodbye, Piri.
Goodbye, Jing.
Have you forgotten anything?
Don't lose your ideas.
Try to tell us if it's nice.
Enough! Enough!
Roared Time in a huge voice, shaking his big keys and his terrible scythe.
Enough! The anchor's weighed.
Then the children climbed onto the gold galley with the beautiful white silk sails. They waved their hands again to the little friends whom they were leaving behind them. But on seeing the earth in the distance, they cried out gladly,
Earth, 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 I can see it. I can see it. How bright it is. How big it is. How big it is.
And at the same time, as though coming from the abyss, a song rose. A distant song of gladness and expectation. Light, who was listening with a smile, saw the look of astonishment on Tyltyl's face and bent over him.
It is the song of the mothers coming out to meet them,
she said. At that moment, Time, who had shut the doors, saw our friends and rushed at them angrily, shaking his scythe at them.
Hurry,
said Light.
Hurry, take the bluebird, Tyltyl, and go in front of me with Mytyl.
She put into the boy's arms a bird which she held hidden under her cloak, and all radiant, spreading her dazzling veil with her 2 hands. She ran on, protecting her charges from the onslaught of Time. In this way they passed through several turquoise and sapphire galleries. It was magnificently beautiful, but they were in the kingdom of the future, where Time was the great master, and they must escape from his anger, which they had braved. Mytyl was terribly frightened, and Tyltyl kept nervously turning around to Light.
Don't be afraid,
she said.
I am the only person who Time has respected since the world began. Only mind that you take care of the bluebird. He's gorgeous. He is quite blue.
This thought entrapped the boy. He felt the precious treasure fluttering in his arms. His hands dared not press the pretty creature's soft, warm wings, and his heart beat against its heart. This time he held the bluebird. Nothing could touch it, because it was given to him by Light herself. What a triumph when he returned home! He was so bewildered by his happiness that he hardly knew where he was going. His joy rang a victorious peal in his head that made him feel giddy, and he was mad with pride, and this, worse luck, made him lose his coolness and his presence of mind. They were just about to cross the threshold of the palace when a gust of wind swept through the entrance hall, lifting up Light's veil and at last revealing the 2 children to the eyes of Time, who was still pursuing them. With a roar of rage, he darted his scythe at Tyltyl, who cried out. Light warded off the blow, and the door of the palace closed behind them with a thud. They were saved. But alas, Tyltyl, taken by surprise, had opened his arms, and now through his tears saw the bluebird of the future soaring above their heads, mingling with the azure sky, its dream wings so blue, so light, and so transparent that soon the boy could make out nothing more. Chapter 5 of The Bluebird, the Kingdom of the Future, read by Ian King.
Chapter 6 of The Bluebird for Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bluebird for Children by Joshua Leblanc, translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matos. Chapter 6 In the Temple of Light. Tyltyl had enjoyed himself thoroughly in the kingdom of the future. He had seen many wonderful things and thousands of little playfellows, and then, without taking the least pains or trouble, had found the bluebird in his arms in the most magical way. He had never pictured anything more beautiful, more blue or brilliant, and he still felt it fluttering against his heart, and kept hugging his arms to his breast as though the bluebird were there. Alas, it had vanished like a dream. He was thinking sadly of this latest disappointment as he walked hand in hand with Light. They were back in the temple and were going to the vaults where the animals and things had been shut up. What a sight met their eyes! The wretches had eaten and drunk such a lot that they were lying on the floor quite tipsy. Tyltyl himself had lost all his dignity. He had rolled under the table and was snoring like a porpoise. His instinct remained, and the sound of the door made him prick up his ears. He opened one eye, but his sight was troubled by all that he had had a drink, and he did not know his little master when he saw him. He dragged himself to his feet with a great effort, turned round several times, and then dropped on the floor again with a grunt of satisfaction. Brett and the others were as bad, and the only exception was the cat, who was sitting up prettily on a marble and gold bench and seemed in full possession of her senses. She sprang nimbly to the ground and stepped up to Tyltyl with a smile. "I have been longing to see you," she said, "for I have been very unhappy among all these vulgar people. They first drank all the wine and then started shouting and singing and dancing, quarrelling and fighting, and making such a noise that I was very glad when at last I fell into a tipsy sleep." The children praised her warmly for her good behavior. As a matter of fact, there was no great merit in this, for she could not stand anything stronger than milk. But we are seldom rewarded when by rights we ought to be, and sometimes are when we have not deserved it. After fondly kissing the children, Tilly asked a favor of Light. "I've had such a wretched time," she whined. "Let me go out for a while. It will do me good to be alone." Light gave her consent without suspecting anything, and the cat at once draped her cloak around her, put her head straight, pulled up her soft grey boots over her knees, opened the door, and ran and bounded out into the forest. We shall know a little later where treacherous Tyltyl was going so gaily, and what was the horrid plot which she was mysteriously concocting. As on the other days, the children had their dinner with Light in a large room, all encrusted with diamonds. The servants bustled around them, smiling, and brought delicious dishes and cakes. After dinner, our little friends began to yawn. They felt sleepy very early after all their adventures. And Light, ever kind and thoughtful, made them live as they were accustomed to on earth. So as not to injure their health by altering their habits, she had set up their little beds in a part of the temple where the darkness would seem like night to them. They went through any number of rooms to reach their bedroom. They had first to pass all the lights known to men, and then those which men did not yet know. There were great sumptuous apartments in splendid marble, lit up by rays so wide and strong that the children were quite dazzled. "That is the light of the rich," said Light to Tyltyl. "You see how dangerous it is. People run the risk of going blind when they live too much in its ray, which leave no room for soft and kindly shade." And she hurried them on so that they might rest their eyes in the gentle light of the pool. Here the children suddenly felt as if they were in their parents' cottage, where everything was so humble and peaceful. The faint light was very pure and clear, but always flickering and ready to go out at the least breath. Next they came to the beautiful light of the pots, which they liked immensely, for it had all the colours of the rainbow, and when you passed through it you saw lovely pictures, lovely flowers, and lovely toys, which you were unable to take hold of. Laughing merrily, the children ran after birds and butterflies, but everything faded away as soon as it was touched. "Well, I never!" said Tyltyl as he came panting back to Light. "This beats everything. I can't understand it." "You will understand later," she replied, "and if you understand it properly, you will be among the very few human beings who know the bluebird when they see him." After leaving the region of the poets, our friends reached the light of the learned, which lies on the borders of the known and the unknown lights. "Let's get on," said Tyltyl. "This is boring." To tell the truth, he was a little bit frightened, for they were in a long row of cold and forbidding arches, which were struck at every moment by dazzling lightning flashes. And at each flash you saw out-of-the-way things that had no name as yet. After these arches, they came to the lights unknown to men, and Tyltyl, in spite of the sleep that pressed upon his eyelids, could not help admiring the hall with its violet columns and the gallery with its red rays. And the violet of the columns was such a dark violet, and the red of the rays such a pale red, that it was hardly possible to see either of them. At last they arrived at the room of smooth, unflecked black light, which men call darkness because their eyes are not yet able to make it out, and here the children fell asleep without delay on two soft beds of clouds. End of chapter 6.